Tom Hanks stepped out of the car, stretching his legs after the long drive into the heart of a town that time had almost forgotten. The sign on the outskirts read, Harbor's End, population 3,672. It was the kind of place where the buildings told stories, where history clung to the air like morning fog, rolling in from the hills. Tom had been to countless small towns over the years for film shoots, charity work, and the occasional getaway from Hollywood. But this place felt different. Before continuing our story, if you subscribe and like the video, you will provide us with the greatest support. Keep in mind that a new video will come every day. He was here to shoot a film, a quiet, intimate project about resilience and redemption. But as he walked down the main street, he noticed something peculiar. The town carried a sense of unspoken reverence, as though the people here shared a common secret. It wasn't just the way they nodded politely before continuing on their way. It was the whispers he caught in passing, the hushed voices that trailed off when he got too close. Something had happened in Harbor's End. Someone had happened. Tom had always been good at reading people, and these people carried the weight of a name unspoken, a legend perhaps, someone who had left an imprint so deep that it remained long after they were gone. He had to know more. Tom made his way into a cozy diner, Marge's Eatery, according to the peeling sign above the door. Inside, it smelled of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. A waitress, a woman in her 60s with silver curls and tired but kind eyes, greeted him. "Well now, we don't get many famous faces in Harbor's End. Welcome, Mr. Hanks. What can I get you?" Tom smiled, sliding into a booth. "Just coffee for now, and please call me Tom." She poured his cup and leaned on the counter. "So, what brings you to our little town?" Tom took a sip, then set the cup down thoughtfully. "Shooting a film. But I have a feeling there's a bigger story here than the one we're making." The woman, her name tag read Margaret, tilted her head. "And what makes you say that?" "People keep whispering about something, or someone. It's like the town is carrying a memory they don't know what to do with." Margaret's expression faltered for a brief moment. Just a flicker of something. Recognition, hesitation, maybe even grief. Then she straightened, offering a practiced smile. "Oh, you know how small towns are. Stories get passed down. Folks remember things in their own ways." Tom studied her. "And what's the story they remember here?" She hesitated. "Just a man who gave everything." The words hung between them. Tom could feel the weight of them, the finality in her tone, but also the way it felt unfinished, like an ending that hadn't yet been written. "Who was he?" Tom pressed gently. Margaret exhaled slowly, glancing toward a framed newspaper clipping on the wall. It was faded, the ink slightly smudged with age. Tom followed her gaze and saw the headline, "Local Hero Saves Town, Then Disappears." His pulse quickened. He stood, stepping closer, eyes scanning the article. The details were vague. The man's name was nowhere in sight. Just phrases like, "a man who asked for nothing," and "a debt that could never be repaid." Margaret watched him carefully. "You won't find his name in the papers." Tom turned back to her. "Why not?" "Because he didn't want it there. He never wanted recognition, never wanted the town to owe him anything." She paused. "But we do. Even after all these years, we do." Tom's curiosity burned. "What did he do?" Margaret hesitated again, then finally spoke. "He saved this town. And then he was gone. Just like that. No one knows where he went, or if he's even alive." Tom frowned. "And no one tried to find him." Margaret's lips pressed together. Some things aren't meant to be found. But Tom wasn't convinced. That night, after the day's filming wrapped, Tom couldn't stop thinking about the nameless hero. The way Margaret had spoken about him, it wasn't just respect, it was loss. He pulled on a jacket and set off through the quiet streets of Harbour's End, following the faintest whisper of a lead. An old house on the edge of town, where the man had once lived. The house stood at the very end of a lonely road, half hidden by the embrace of towering oak trees. It was abandoned, the windows boarded up, the front porch sagging under the weight of time. Tom stepped closer, the night air thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten history. He reached the porch and ran his fingers along the worn wooden railing. And then he saw it. A single letter wedged into the crack of the door frame, untouched by time. Heart pounding, he pulled it free and unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting was neat but unsteady, as though written in a moment of deep reflection. If you've come looking for me, it means you still remember. That means I did something right. But the past doesn't need me anymore. You do. Tom's breath hitched. This was a message meant for someone, but who? And how long had it been waiting to be read? He turned the letter over, hoping for a signature. There was none. Only one final line. I gave everything so others wouldn't have to, but I never said goodbye. Tom exhaled slowly, gripping the letter tightly. Whoever this man was, wherever he had gone, his story wasn't over. Not yet. Tom Hanks sat on the porch steps of the abandoned house, staring at the letter he had just found. The weight of its words pressed heavily on him. I gave everything so others wouldn't have to, but I never said goodbye. Who had written these words, and why had they been left here, waiting to be found? The night air was still, the only sound, the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees surrounding the house. Tom knew one thing for certain. Whoever this man was, he had left a lasting mark on Harbour's End. And yet the town had allowed his story to fade into whispers, into half-remembered gratitude and silence. That needed to change. The next morning, Tom returned to Marge's eatery, hoping Margaret would be willing to share more. As he stepped inside, the diner was already buzzing with early morning chatter. Margaret stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for a group of elderly men at the far end of the bar. She glanced up as Tom approached, her expression cautious but kind. You're back. Tom nodded, sliding into the same booth as the day before. And I'm still curious. He placed the letter on the table, watching as her eyes flickered to the paper. I found this, at his house. Margaret didn't move to touch it, but Tom could tell she recognized the handwriting. You shouldn't have gone there, she murmured. Why not? Tom asked. This man, whoever he was, deserves to be remembered. And from what I can tell, no one's been looking for him. Margaret sighed, leaning on the counter. It's not that we don't care. It's complicated. Tom waited, giving her space to decide if she wanted to continue. Finally, she spoke. His name was Samuel Grayson, she said, voice soft but firm. And he saved this town in ways most people don't even know. Samuel Grayson had moved to Harbour's End nearly 30 years ago. A former engineer, he arrived when the town was on the verge of economic collapse. The local mill, which had been the town's primary source of employment, was shutting down due to financial mismanagement. Families were packing up, businesses were closing. Harbour's End was dying. Then Samuel stepped in. No one knew where he came from, Margaret said, staring at the letter. One day, he just showed up and started helping. He convinced the town council to let him redesign the mill's infrastructure, promising to cut costs and improve efficiency. No one thought it would work, but he made it work. Within a year, the mill was profitable again. Jobs were saved, and people stayed. He didn't take a dime for what he did, Margaret continued. Turned down every offer of payment. Just said he was happy to help. Tom frowned. And then what happened? Margaret hesitated. He disappeared. Tom leaned forward. Just like that? After saving the town? Margaret nodded. One morning, he was just gone. No explanation, no goodbye. The house you visited, it was his. He left it behind, untouched. Tom thought about the letter he had found. And no one went looking for him? Margaret sighed. Of course we did. A few people searched. The sheriff checked records. No missing person report was ever filed. It was like he never existed before he came here. Tom tapped his fingers against the table. That doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't, Margaret admitted. But some people don't want to be found. Tom knew that wasn't entirely true. Samuel had left behind a letter, and people who truly wanted to disappear didn't leave behind messages. Something wasn't right. Tom spent the rest of the day exploring the town, talking to shop owners, local elders, anyone who might remember Samuel Grayson. Everyone had the same story. He had arrived a stranger, saved them, and vanished like a ghost. As evening fell, he found himself back at Samuel's abandoned house, standing on the porch where he had found the letter. He decided to check inside once more, searching for anything he might have missed. The house was eerily quiet, dust motes floating in the slivers of sunlight peeking through boarded-up windows. Tom walked through the rooms carefully, pushing open a creaky door that led to what seemed like a small study. A desk sat against the far wall, covered in a thin layer of dust. Then he saw it, a hidden drawer, slightly ajar, as if someone had left it that way intentionally. Heart pounding, Tom pulled it open and found a second letter. But this one was different. It wasn't addressed to just anyone. It was addressed to him. Tom Hanks stared at the envelope in his hands. The dust-covered letter, tucked away in the hidden drawer of Samuel Grayson's abandoned house, was unmistakably addressed to him. His heart pounded as he carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was precise, but carried an urgency beneath the ink. Tom, if you found this, then you are closer than anyone has ever come. That means you're asking the right questions, and it means I was right about you. There are things in life we give away freely: time, money, effort, but the hardest thing to give is the truth. I left for a reason, and it wasn't because I wanted to disappear. It was because I had to. I need you to do something for me. Go to the mill. The answers are there. Samuel Grayson. Tom exhaled, reading the letter again. Samuel had known someone would come looking for him one day. But why had he left this for him? Had he anticipated that it would be Tom Hanks who would stumble upon his story? Only one way to find out. The mill's secrets. The old mill loomed on the outskirts of town, its tall structure silhouetted against the early evening sky. It had once been the heart of Harbor's End, but after Samuel's sudden departure, the town had struggled to keep it running efficiently. Though still operational, it lacked the brilliance and care that had once saved it from ruin. Tom approached the main office, its door creaking as he pushed it open. The smell of aged wood and metal greeted him. Inside, the walls were lined with ledgers and production records, some dating back decades. He scanned the office until something caught his eye: a safe partially hidden behind an old bookcase. It looked untouched for years. On its surface, there was a faint engraving. The price of giving is knowing when to let go. Samuel's words echoed in Tom's mind. He tried turning the dial, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. A thought struck him. Margaret. If anyone knew the combination, it would be her. Tom hurried back to Marge's eatery, finding Margaret behind the counter, drying glasses. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. Margaret, Tom said, sliding the letter onto the counter. I need to know what happened to Samuel, and I need the combination to the safe in the mill. Margaret's hands stilled. She sighed, rubbing her temples as if wrestling with the past. I was hoping you wouldn't find that. But I did, Tom pressed, and I need to know why he left. Margaret hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. Samuel didn't just save the mill, Tom. He owned it. Tom's eyes widened. What? He never told anyone. Didn't want the town to think they owed him. He put everything he had into keeping this place alive. And when it was time to collect what he was owed, he refused. Walked away from millions rather than take from the people he helped. Tom shook his head in disbelief. Why would he do that? Margaret's eyes softened. Because he believed that true giving meant letting go. If he had stayed, the town would have forever felt indebted to him. He didn't want gratitude. He wanted people to stand on their own. Tom let the truth settle in. Samuel had given everything, then vanished so that the people he helped wouldn't feel like they owed him their lives. And the safe? Tom asked. Margaret hesitated before sliding a napkin toward him. On it, she scribbled a 6-digit code. He left something behind, for when the time was right, she said. Maybe that time is now. That night, Tom returned to the mill. The safe loomed before him, waiting. With a deep breath, he turned the dial, entering the numbers Margaret had given him. Click. The door swung open. Inside, there were documents, financial records, and a final letter. Tom picked it up and unfolded it carefully. If you are reading this, then I hope you understand now. What I gave freely. But there is one last thing left to give. The town doesn't know it yet, but they own this mill. The papers inside transfer everything to them. I never wanted repayment. I just wanted to leave a place better than I found it. And now, it's time for someone else to do the same. Samuel Grayson. Tom's hands trembled as he realized what this meant. Samuel had left Harbor's End with nothing, not because he was running away, but because he had already given everything he had to give. And now it was up to Tom to make sure his final wish was honored. Elena led Tom Hanks to a quiet reading nook in the corner of the library. The room was dimly lit, filled with old books that smelled of time and history. She motioned for him to sit as she settled into a chair across from him. Her fingers lightly traced the edges of a worn leather journal she had pulled from a nearby shelf. Walter wasn't always alone, she began softly, her voice carrying the weight of old memories. He once had a wife and a daughter. Her name was Lillian. Tom leaned in, sensing that this was the key to the mystery he had been unraveling. Lillian was everything to him, Elena continued. She was kind, bright, full of life. Walter used to work in community outreach, helping struggling families find stability. He loved his job, but he loved his daughter more. A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. Then, tragedy struck. Tom's chest tightened. What happened? Eleanor took a steadying breath. One winter, Lillian became very sick. It started with a simple cough, but it worsened fast. Walter and his wife did everything they could, but they didn't have the money for advanced medical care. They reached out for help, but the resources weren't enough. Lillian, she didn't make it. Tom closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the impact of those words settle into his bones. He could picture the grief Walter must have endured, the weight of losing a child to something as cruel as circumstance. When Lillian passed, Walter changed, Eleanor continued. He quit his job. He withdrew from friends, from life, and for a while, he disappeared. Tom swallowed the lump in his throat. But he came back. Eleanor nodded. He came back as a different man. He told me once that if no one had been able to help his daughter, then he would spend the rest of his life making sure others didn't feel that same helplessness. Tom exhaled, the pieces fitting together at last. Walter's small acts of kindness, the scarves left for the homeless, the notes of encouragement, the quiet donations, were all his way of making sure no one felt as alone as he once did. Eleanor opened the leather journal, flipping through pages filled with Walter's neat handwriting. This was his. He recorded every act of kindness he ever did, not for recognition, but to remind himself that he was still making a difference. Tom reached for the journal with reverence, running his fingers over the inked words. He turned his pain into purpose. Elena nodded, and he never stopped. Tom's heart ached at the realization. Walter had carried his grief alone, never speaking of it, only acting on it. And now it was Tom who had to decide what to do with the story left behind. I want to continue what he started, Tom said, his voice firm with conviction. Walter's kindness shouldn't end with him. A small smile formed on Elena's lips. Then I have something else to show you. She stood and motioned for Tom to follow. Come with me. Walter left something behind, and I think he meant for you to find it. The morning after the town meeting, Harbour's End felt different. It was as if a weight had been lifted, as if the town had woken up from a long slumber of unspoken gratitude. People moved with purpose, their conversations filled with plans instead of whispers. Tom Hanks walked down Main Street, observing the change. Shopkeepers dusted off old signs, young people gathered at the mill, and even the elderly seemed to carry themselves with renewed energy. Something had been reignited in them. Hope. He spotted Margaret standing outside Marge's eatery, wiping down the windows with a bright, determined look on her face. Well, look at you, Tom teased as he approached. Haven't seen you this energized since I got here. Margaret smirked, shaking her head. Turns out remembering the past can help build the future. She nodded toward a small group of people across the street. They were gathering supplies, wood, paint, tools. What's happening? Tom asked. We're fixing up Samuel's house, just like we said, gonna turn it into a community space, a place where people can come when they need help, just like he would have wanted. Tom felt a warmth spread in his chest. That's perfect. Margaret's eyes softened. You started this, you know. If you hadn't come here, his story might have stayed buried. Tom shook his head. It was always here. It just needed the right people to remember. Tom joined the town's efforts at Samuel's abandoned house. The place that had once stood as a symbol of mystery was now a symbol of renewal. The old porch was repaired, its once rotting wood replaced with strong new beams. The broken windows were restored, allowing sunlight to flood into the rooms that had been left in darkness for too long. Walls were repainted, each stroke bringing life back into the home of the man who had given his all. At one point, Tom found himself standing in Samuel's old study. The hidden drawer where he had found the letter remained slightly open, as if it had been waiting for someone all these years. Margaret entered the room behind him. Feels like he's still here, doesn't it? Tom nodded. Yeah, like he never really left. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. I meant to give this to you sooner, she said, unwrapping it. Inside was a silver pocket watch, old, but well cared for. Samuel's, Tom guessed. Margaret nodded. He left it with me before he disappeared. Told me one day someone will come looking for me. If they find the truth, give them this. Tom turned the watch over in his hands. Engraved on the back were the words, "Time is the only thing we truly own, so give it well." Tom exhaled, his grip tightening around the watch. He always knew someone would come. Margaret smiled. And now you carry part of his story, too. A week later, the town gathered for an official ceremony outside the newly restored house. The plaque near the front door read, "The Graysons Center a Place for Those in Need, built on the kindness of one man who gave everything." As the townspeople stood together, a sense of unity filled the air. They weren't just honoring a man. They were committing to continue his legacy. Tom stepped forward, clearing his throat. "When I first came to Harbor's End, I thought I was just here to make a film. But I found a much greater story, one that was real, one that mattered." He held up Samuel's pocket watch. Samuel left behind something far more valuable than money. He left behind the proof that one person's kindness can change the lives of many. And today, this town stands as proof of that. The crowd erupted into applause, not just for Samuel, but for themselves, for choosing to remember, for choosing to carry his kindness forward. That evening, Tom returned to the quiet hill overlooking the town, the place where he had first read Samuel's letter. He held the pocket watch tightly and whispered into the night, "You did good, Samuel. They remember." And as the wind carried his words through the town below, Tom felt a sense of peace, knowing the man who gave everything had never truly left, at all. Tom Hanks sat on the steps of the newly restored Grayson Center, watching as the people of Harbor's End filed in and out. It had been 1 month since the town had come together to honor Samuel Grayson, and already the center was buzzing with life. A group of teenagers was repainting the fence, a local baker had donated fresh bread for those in need, and an elderly couple was helping plant flowers along the walkway. Samuel's vision had come full circle, not because he had asked for it, but because the town had chosen to carry it forward. Margaret stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Well, it's official," she said. "This place has more heart than any building I've ever seen." Tom chuckled, glancing at the engraved plaque by the entrance. "The Grayson Center a Place for Those in Need, built on the kindness of one man who gave everything." He tapped the pocket watch in his hand, the one Samuel had left behind, its message now permanently etched into Tom's mind. "Time is the only thing we truly own, so give it well." "Margaret," Tom said thoughtfully, "I think it's time for me to leave." She raised an eyebrow. "Already? You sure you don't want to stick around and see how the festival turns out?" The town had decided to hold an annual Grayson Festival, celebrating acts of kindness and charity, both small and large. It would be a time for giving back, just as Samuel had done in his quiet, unassuming way. Tom smiled. "I'll be back for it someday. But right now, there are other places, other stories to uncover. And besides, I have an idea." Margaret folded her arms. "Should I be worried?" Tom laughed. "Only if you're not ready for some big changes. I want to set up a foundation in Samuel's name, not just for this town, but for places like this everywhere. Communities that just need someone to believe in them." Margaret's eyes widened. "Tom, that's incredible." "It's not about me," Tom said, shaking his head. "It never was. It's about keeping Samuel's legacy alive beyond Harbor's End. If he gave everything to make life better for others, the least we can do is make sure his spirit keeps moving forward. Margaret blinked back tears before nodding. He'd be proud of you. Tom looked out at the town one last time. The people, the buildings, the renewed hope in their eyes. He knew that what had been set in motion wouldn't stop here. Kindness had a way of spreading, just like Samuel had always believed. He stood up, slipping the pocket watch into his coat pocket. Let's get started. As he walked away, a gentle breeze rolled through the town, rustling the trees and carrying with it the echoes of a man who had given everything. Not for recognition, not for wealth, but simply because he could. And in that moment, Tom knew. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Final message. Samuel Grayson's legacy reminds us that the smallest act of kindness can create ripples that last forever. His story isn't just about one town. It's about all of us. So, what will you give today? If you liked the video and want new videos to come, you can like the video and follow us by subscribing. Have a nice day.